Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 4 of Healers with me, your host, Peter Collin. Now today my guest is Paddy Doyle. Paddy originally hails from near to Urlingford in County Kilkenny in Ireland, and he's been living in my own home county of Cork for quite a while now. Paddy is a writer, he's a poet, an archaeologist, a storyteller, or in Irish we say shanky. He's a performer, and he runs his own alternative and holistic health practice. He's got a true personal, a spiritual, and I'd say a religious connection to the land. And his sense of place and his sense of self in the midst of what looks like a chaotic world these days is hugely admirable. He's got a vast knowledge of Gaelic folklore, Irish druidic practice, shamanism, literature, and culture, and it's a joy to behold. But it's the uniqueness of his larger-than-life personality that brings all of this knowledge together into one of the most easygoing conversationalists I've met. Now, when I spoke with Paddy for the first time about a year ago, I knew immediately that I wanted to have a conversation with him for this series. Because for me, there's great healing, there's great learning and comfort when it's needed to be found in the spoken word and in the stories that we tell, especially stories passed down through the generations. Now, neither of us prepared for this conversation. I did that partly intentionally because I knew that once we met over a cup of coffee, the conversation would be spontaneous, without structure or agenda, but it would still be fascinating. But then when you meet somebody like Paddy, the words inevitably flow. And then you have humour and wisdom and sometimes even emotion forming to present themselves of their own accord. Now, every now and again, Paddy interlaces his language with the odd Irish word, just here and there. So I'll try to clarify those for the non-Irish speakers along the way. Paddy can be contacted at his Facebook, and those details are in the description below. And now I invite you to join me in speaking with Mr. Paddy Doyle. So, Paddy, Mr. Paddy Doyle, you're welcome. You're welcome to our home, and you're welcome to the Less Stress space. So, thank you so much for making the time to join me.
My pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm delighted that you made time. It's fantastic because this is something I've actually wanted to do for a long time.
Yeah.
And I remember meeting you at a garden party or a kind of a little gathering there about a year ago.
In Kinsale, wasn't it?
In Kinsale, that's
yeah.
right, yeah, at a mutual friend's place. And I knew after about 2 minutes, I said, there's a guy now I need to talk to. The Less Stress space, because I'm continuously on the lookout for interesting characters who I feel can add something to people's lives, you know. And the way we met was even funny. I remember talking about the fact that we were on we'd been on an Airbnb.
Yeah, that's I forgot about that actually. Yeah,
we hired an Airbnb in Kilkenny.
Yeah,
and we were just back, and I described where it was, and this light went up in your head.
I told you
and you said there was a castle outside the door across in a field, right? And I said that's right, and you said that's my field, you know. And I was like, how random is that, you know?
That's pretty random, yeah. I've never met anyone else in the world who's ever gone on holidays to Urlingford. We started something new here, Peter.
From a pro Kilkenny man.
Yeah, we need to do a documentary on you, I think.
But listen, so this is great because after I got talking to you, I found out so many things about you and what you do, and your background is incredibly interesting. So I'm going to hand that to you. So if you don't mind, for everybody on the page, who is absolutely welcome, thanks for tuning in. If you can just give us a bit of a bio, just let me know.
A brief bio. My name is Paddy Doyle. I hail from County Kilkenny, North Kilkenny. I grew up on a farm in a valley in North Kilkenny. Grew up on a farm with, unusually I think, for my generation anyway, I grew up with my parents and my brothers and sisters, 6 of us, but I also grew up with my grandmother and my grandfather in the same house, which it doesn't really happen so much anymore, which I feel was actually a great blessing, really, to have 3 generations in a house, you know. And and especially now that I'm a father myself, I see sometimes, and because I'm away from home, And I grew up in a very kind of deeply knit or intricately, I suppose, interwoven rural community that was transgenerational, really, you know.
Okay.
There was families who had lived there since, my own included, since before living memory, really, you know.
Okay.
So there's serious webs of kinship and blood and being through stuff together through hundreds of years, you know. And now that I moved away from home, and when you move away, I found that because I grew up like that, my childhood was surrounded by men. As a young man growing up, my childhood was surrounded by men, because my father was from there, and my uncle lived there next door, and all his friends are around. But my grandfather was around, so all his friends are around, in and out of the house the whole time. Do you know what I mean? Like
very Irish.
Very Irish, very Irish. Like, yes, so I grew up with elders. Which is quite unusual for my generation, and especially for my son's generation. I think there was always an older man around to show you how to hunt or fish, to hurl, to how to drink a pint, how to walk into a pub, how to talk to a woman, all that, you know. Not just an older man, but 2 generations of them at least, you know. How to tell a story, all that crack, you know. So that was quite unique, and that's it. I feel that was a great privilege for me, you know, and that's something I definitely. I feel is missing in our culture
today.
That having grandparents around, I feel is very important. Like, you know, because parents, when you're a parent, it's you're a parent yourself. You know, the crash here is it's an experiment, isn't it? Like, you know, you're given this child and there's no instructions. Like, you just go and figure it out as you can, and sure, by the time it's only by the time you haven't reared that you kind of figured out what you're supposed to have done. You know, you know, and you're busy and you're stressed and you're trying to make a living and all this crack, pay the mortgage and all that. But grandparents, on the other hand, are around and they've done all that, so they have time, and there's less pressure on them to be perfect parents, so they can, you know, I feel it's a buffer. Like, sometimes you can have that other kind of quieter wisdom around, you know, and also their elders are a doorway to a world that is, no matter what generation you're in, the elders are a doorway to a world that no longer exists. So when I grew up, my grandfather and my grandmother, they came from a world that was gone. And it only existed in their stories and their memories, and their great talent was remembering. Like, and it's through their remembering, I feel, that world gets transmitted to the grandchildren. Like,
no, we're touching on something in particular there, which, you know, it's triggering the very reason why I wanted to speak to you, because as we all know, the less the people on the page will know, the less stress space was brought about, really, I suppose, to share ideas about improving your life, maybe healing your life, maybe living your best life, and exploring your horizons, your personal horizons, you know. And when I spoke to you, I said, I have to talk to that guy, because it's my belief there's a great conversation to be had in around the healing power and just the general power on your life of the spoken word, of tradition, of storytelling, of being in touch with, let's say, nature and the land. And I see all that in you. So would you maybe tell us a little bit more about your I suppose, the talents, or what you bring to the table when it comes to, you know, being
So at the minute I work as a poet and a storyteller. I also I do healing work. I work one-on-one clients, and I do a lot of land healing, actually. Land healing and house healing. Like, I don't do the healing. I'm a mediator, I suppose. I facilitate. I hold a space where I have friends in the world of spirit. Usually elemental beings, or in the elemental or plant animal kingdoms, in the ancestor kingdoms and the David kingdoms as well. Like, and there's a funny thing in if you look at traditional Irish fairy stories, there's a particular motif in them where, as it comes down to us in more recent times, it's the one where there's some lad is off for a walk one night, and he gets a bit lost and he ends up in fairyland. He's probably had a few pints, but sure, you know. But this is a motif, like, and when he gets there, he realizes he's been called there. He's maybe tricked into coming there, like, because what's going on in the fairy world is, like, there's usually a hurling match going on, right? And it's been going on for a long, long time, and nobody can win. And he has to come in and talk out, like, and pick one team, like, and then he plays, and he usually scores a win a point or win a goal, like, and then the match is over and it's resolved, like. So there seems to be this thing that in the spirit for spiritual work sometimes to progress, or for things or procedures in the spiritual dimension, of which this earthly exist as we know is the foundation. Like, yeah. So for things to reach their full course, or for the thing to go click and make things work out, like, human interaction is sometimes needed. Like, so it seems like humans are an intermediary between this world of spirit, or we call it the other world, as it's traditionally called in Ireland, like the other world, and the earth. So heavenly and the earthly realms. Like, we seem to be intermediaries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
It's very interesting. Like, yeah. That's quite a regular motif in. So why I'm coming to that is, like, when I say I do land healing or healing work, I don't do the healing, like, but I'm the guy who's talking out, like, I'm it's through me as a mediator, like, that the healing energy can flow in and re-stabilize or rebalance or reintegrate what's not right in the earthly realms, like, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you seem to be a conduit, so for that, and do you, where does that kind of inspiration come from to get into? Where did it come from originally to get involved with that? I'm kind of thinking about your background, the fact that your grandparents were present, the fact that you had a very traditional Irish transitionary kind of upbringing from, let's say, a particular type of life in Ireland to maybe a more modern life, and you had the storytelling passed down. Was that your way you woke up to this?
It's hard to. It's hard to say. It was always there for me. It's a gift. It's in my family, on both sides of the field, particularly my father's side, from my grandmother's people. Like, my grandmother was she was a small woman. She was only about 5'1", like, yeah. But she had a gift, really. She had a relationship with nature, and for me and for her, and I think traditionally for people in Ireland, going all the way back to early Christianity and beyond that to the druids or whatever, like, a relationship with nature, with the natural kingdoms, is the way you develop a relationship to the divine. Okay. Like, even say Columbanus, Saint Columba, the one of the early saints in the early Irish Church. Sure. He's what he used to say, and what their ethos really was, like, the mind of the Creator is incomprehensible. We cannot know God, like, but to come to understand the mind of the Creator, study the creature, which is study creation. So if you want to understand the poet, if you want to understand the poet, read his poetry, like, spend time with it. You want to understand the musician, listen to his songs. You want to understand God, study nature, like. So this continual development and studying of the natural world in all its magnificence, in its interwovenness, and in its subtleties, and the ever changingness of it, like, and building that relationship over time, like. And so I grew up with that in a way, like. Now, it wasn't consciously spoken like that, like. That was just around. That was an unconscious way of being that was there. Okay. I'm able to articulate it now, and in a way, how I articulate it is maybe my own way of perception that I brought to that world. Do you know what I mean? Like, and central to that, I feel, and central to the way I was brought up, as well as stories and songs. I was reared in stories and songs, like. I was just reared in stories. Okay. Reared in stories, like. Yeah, stories of stuff.
Instead of me, it was television, but yeah.
Yeah, I was reared in stories. I didn't really watch telly, like, you know what I mean? Like, just because my father talked a lot.
That's where you get it.
You couldn't watch anything, do you know what I mean? Because everything stirred. Everything, he was like, my father was like, he didn't read now. He was a very highly intelligent man, but he never read. But he had a phenomenal memory, and he was like an encyclopedia of local lore and memory, and everything triggered him, like. So everything would spur a story, spur a memory, spur a reminiscence, you know. And so we're reared in stories, and my grandfather was the same, you know. Okay. Yeah.
And did your father learn those stories from? I suppose he picked it up all around, really. So did he?
It's like he didn't even think about it. It's like a fish swimming in water, like. He didn't even think about it. He just, water was there. He took it for granted. I just grew up stories in my water, you know. Yeah. It comes from a love of place. Yeah. And it comes from a love of place and a love of the land. Sure. Yeah. A love of history and a love of tradition. Yeah. And an understanding. I'm about to get emotional now. An understanding of the importance of honouring and remembering. Yeah, excellent. Those who have gone before us. Yeah. Yeah. Saying their names, telling their stories, like my father would tell me stories about people he never met, like, because he got them. They came to him from his father, who came to him from his mother, like,
Sure.
you know.
Yeah.
So I when I grew up, I had friends
Yeah.
who were dead 100 years, like.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That's,
and they'd be a huge part of me.
but that's a unique way of looking at it. I've never heard that way. You know, I've never heard it described like that before.
Yeah.
You know, I have friends that are dead 100 years because they're known through tradition and word of mouth and storytelling.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
It's fascinating, like, yeah. And they became a huge part of my my own personal mythology and my local mythology. Like, say for instance, Mick Pack the Wire, these two famous men lived up the Spa Hill, like, you know. They were there in my father's time, but my father, he loved them, and he had all these brilliant stories about them, you know. Mick was a sportsman. Mick was an engineer, and Pat was a sportsman, and they were just odd, and they were beautiful, you know what I mean? And they had his collie sheepdog. And they lived up the Spa Hill, which there's a big hill near us, and it was full of hazelwoods.
Okay.
It was kind of a magical place when we were growing up, because it was the peripheral of our world, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Beyond there, you know what I mean? That was the edge of our world. So when we go up there a couple of times a year, like, and to be like living on the edge, you know, just high up, we could see the whole valley, like, you know what I mean?
Lovely.
Like, Making Pack had his collie sheepdog, who used to go up to the hazelwoods, bring down nuts, and she'd crack nuts. And she'd spit out the shell and she'd eat the kernels, like, you know. That's a beautiful thing, you know.
Yeah, like, it really strikes me that, you know, you're almost painting a picture, you know, of that particular memory, and it's like, you know.
But I never saw that now, like.
But that's like something you can immerse yourself in. Even I can hear the storytelling talent coming through there straight away now. You know, the way you even described the dog, you know, taking care of the hazelnuts, you know, and eating the kernel. It's painting a picture, and I mean, I know, for example, that you perform and you tell stories as a performance art, really, and you're a poet as well.
Yeah.
And so, can you maybe tell me about how you establish that relationship with the written word as well as the spoken word? You know, how that developed maybe over time.
I was always a writer. Really, I'm a poet. My dad was a poet too, although he never wrote. Like, it's a faculty of mind. It's a faculty of perception. I feel in general. It's like all skills. Writing poetry is like all skills. It can be learned, but I feel you can also be born with a talent for it. Like, I feel I was born with the gift of poetry. Like, it's a way of perceiving the world. It's a way of being able to feel into the world, to touch. It's quite psychic, really. Like, it's a way of being able to feel into the world, feel into a situation, or just feel into a person, and to go right to the heart of it, to touch it and pull it out in a phrase or an image, like, that expresses the essence of that situation, that person, like, and that's a particular talent. That's what poetry is, I feel, you know, to be able to touch the essence of a thing to the very heart and bring it out, like, and to express that, you know. So I've always had that. My father had it. He had a gift, a turn of phrase. It's a very Irish thing, really. This thing of a turn of phrase, and it's something we practice all the time in our culture, really, without paying much heed to it. Like, this continual seeking to find a new way of seeing things or a new way of saying things, just say things differently, because language is perception. If you can find a new way of saying it, you found a new way of perceiving it, like, and that's the ever shifting, that's the concealing and the Kyotriakta, the concealing and revealing magic mist. Do you know what I mean? It pulls away and reveals a new aspect of us, and wow, that's it, like, you know. We love that. That's in our culture, like, you know, and that's the poetry. So I grew up, my father had all these old bits of rhymes and poems. There was local lore. I'm an archaeologist as well, and I spent years working as I trained as an archaeologist, went to college, worked as an archaeologist. But at some stage I found that because I have a love of history and deep time and the past and all that, you know, but I found really, or I came to understand in myself, that it's true poems and true stories in which the kind of precious flame of a culture, the living heart, the living beating heart of the culture, is preserved and passed from one generation to the next in the tabernacles of our hearts, like, you know. That's how things are passed down. Because if you, it's alchemy, really. Create art, poetry, story is magic. You're creating something out of thin air, you know, and it's an alchemical experience. It's magic, and it's say for instance, if you take a field of wheat, field of barley, say,
sure,
you harvest it, right? You take it and you boil it down, keep boiling it, processing it until it's the spirit vaporizes out, which is spirit, which is alcohol, which is the very essence of all that barley, like, that's the spirit. You've got to the heart of it, like, Poetry is the same thing. Music and song is the same thing for me. You take a person's experience, a people's experience. You take a man, take a woman, take a culture. You boil them down, process them until there's nothing left but the very spirit of who they were. Well, that spirit in terms of art is poetry and music and song.
Beautiful.
And it's a spirit to me, like, and that's why it's intoxicating.
Yeah.
It's like whiskey.
Yeah.
It's deeply intoxicating. Like, it can make you wild,
Yeah.
joyous. It can make you cry, make you want to love. It can make you lusty. Like,
Yeah.
that's what it's a pure. It's the spirit. It's poetry and music. It's a spirit over people. Like,
Yeah.
and it's not 40% whiskey. It's 70-80% it's pure gene. Like, it's pure, you know, it is like, yeah. And we need it as a people.
Yeah.
We need it to make our heart race and our mind
Yeah.
sing, our blood. You know.
So I mean, you've obviously a deep connection, you know, because you've grown up with this, you know, this understanding and this curiosity to explore it.
Yeah.
I believe the same thing. I believe that, you know, that there's an incredible connection to be made that can draw out everything you've just described from an individual. Yet some people will go through life never knowing that joy.
Yeah.
You know, what's the difference there?
The difference is it's a particular joy, and it's a particular joy, and it's a particular process. But it's also important to say you don't need it to have a full life. There's other joys, other particular experiences that are equally as valid and as equally as satisfying.
Great point.
You know,
Yeah.
but for me, like, I write poetry a lot. Like, I spend my days immersed in poetry, really. You know, it's like Auden said. Wyson Auden said in his great eulogy for William Butler Yeats, poetry makes nothing happen. You know, although it does. You know, but in the end, externally, it probably doesn't really make a whole lot happen. Like, you know, now songs and stories can move with people and give shape, but in the end, that's not why we do it. There's something in ourselves that needs to work out, that needs to process and to turn into something else, and that's why I write, like, really, you know, and that's why we're drawn to write, because for some people, artists, you live your day. You get up in the morning, you live your day, you go to bed. That's what we do. Life is an endless round of days. Some of them are beautiful, some of them are dreary, some of them are hard, some of them are just boring, you know. That's all fine, that's the way it's supposed to be, you know. But for some people, artists, poets, musicians in general, the living of the day is not enough. When you come home and sit down in the evening, it's not enough. There's a need, a desire to take that day and to just put it in your hands and just see it as like a piece of rock, and to just start chipping at it, to see what else is in there, and to crack it open, and you find some ore, and then you go, yeah, that's it. Yeah. That's what's actually in there. Then you get the ore, you melt it down, and you shape something out of it, like, and then it's peace. Because art, I think Seamus Heaney said this, art really is a striving for peace, internal peace, and you're really striving for the peace that comes at the end of the artistic process. Like, you know, like, I can't really recommend poetry to people. Like, I can't really recommend being a writer to people. Like,
you can't.
No.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's a wonderful and it's a fantastic thing. Like, but if it's not for you, don't. People think, oh, everyone should write a book or whatever. Like, it's like, it's a beautiful thing. Everyone should have the gift, learn the gifts of expression and language and writing and all that. It's a wonderful talent. But, like, don't feel the need to be a writer to be an artist, because it's not necessarily all fun, you know. And it's a particular experience you need to be drawn to, you know. And because this urge comes on you, imbos, inspiration, you know. Yeah. That's what's traditionally called.
That's the Irish word.
The ancient Irish word, imbos, for analogy, the bubbles of inspiration.
Sure.
When it comes in, like, it fucking stirs you, you know.
Yeah.
But that's a whole topsy-turvy experience, and, like, I finished a poem 2 weeks ago that I've been working on for 8 years, you know.
Wow.
8 years, yeah. I actually finished a series of poems, 2 or 3 poems and a couple of stories that I started writing maybe 7 or 8 years ago. And I wanted to do something, but I couldn't actually get to finish them or get them to do what I wanted them to be until something had happened inside myself.
Sure.
Until the process I was trying to speak about, I actually had internally done that. Like, and once it did, I went back to them. They came out there. I worked, like, but so it's difficult work, like, you know. And poetry is not just working with language; it's a deep internal process, a very deeply spiritual process. And when I say poetry, I mean arts of any kind, like, you know. You're really processing deep internal archetypical forces that are often you don't really have a full idea of what you're working with, like, and if you did, you wouldn't go near them.
But though you're speaking, a lot of creative people, not all of them, but certainly a percentage. They're almost like tortured souls, that they're trying to grapple with something, that they, they want to get on paper, they want to express. I mean, that strikes me as being an arduous journey almost, I mean, if it takes you eight years to periodically work on something until you feel, that's actually what I wanted to say, that's a big long journey. But on the flip side of it then, in the appreciation of poetry, I mean, for example, I started reading, I bought a book recently by a guy called David White, and David White just takes, in this particular book, he takes words and then he would write what that word, how he interprets it, and it's a beautiful thing to read that, I would never write anything as beautiful, but I can still find solace in the words and in what jumps off the page at me, and what I'm trying to do on this page is get people to think in a different way, maybe look at things in a different way, and that might trigger another thought process that leads to, a positive outcome. And I believe poetry and storytelling can certainly start that.
You're definitely onto there. Like that's the job of the artist, I feel like. Do you know what I mean? So it's to take life as we experience it individually and collectively, like, and to work your way into it and to try and turn it around and present people with a perspective, like, or another way of seeing things, or taking something that's tragically sad and taking it inside yourself and turning it into something that's hilariously funny. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'll play with those things, and that's what we offer to the world. Do you know what I mean? That's the service we provide to the world. Like, take an experience and, I don't know, offering people a different way of looking at it, or giving people a mirror in which they can perceive their own lives, perceive and see and understand and come to know the profundity and the depth of the ordinary. Of the ordinary, like, it's all, for me, poetry is about, it's not about bringing down some high artistic or spiritual God spoke, you know what I mean? It's about taking the ordinary and raising it up to the heights of the gods, like. That's what we do, like. The realized life is monumental,
That's a beautiful thing, because again, there's a direct connection for me there now with, say, trying to live a mindful life, trying to be aware in the moment of what's absolutely ordinary, but at the same time, the miracle of that ordinary thing, and you mentioned being in nature, that's to me one of the biggest, most accessible kind of expressions of that, I mean, the wonder of walking in a forest, for example, or the wonder of being at a beach, and just experiencing it, it's not an ordinary thing, it can be, if you really look at it, it can be amazing,
It's a miracle. It's a miracle, like. Every moment is a miracle, like, in the nature, what being out in the natural world is like walking around in the ultimate piece of poem, the ultimate song, the ultimate piece of art, like,
The ultimate painting,
it's magnificent in its magnitude, and
that's fantastic. So again, like, if anybody takes anything away from this discussion, like, it's that personal peace, that can be found, and that enlightenment and that joy in the ordinary, and you say you can elevate it through poetry to a godly existence.
And for me, like, poetry is a way of bringing us back to it's not about taking, well, sometimes art can be about going away somewhere, fantasy and all that. Like, for me, it's always about coming back to the breath, coming back to the body. I come back to our external body, which is the earth, which is our heart. Do you know? Just coming back. Like, look at pick any great poem. It's not about, they're usually about very ordinary lyrical moments that are continually present within a day, and poetry is it's the Ceoltriacht, the magic mist, in Irish it's the Ceoltriacht, like, which conceals the other world. The other world is not somewhere far away, like, our ancestors and all, in some kingdom miles and millions of miles in the sky. They're with us as we speak, the other world is this world seen, the ordinary world seen through non-ordinary eyes, like. What is the extraordinary? It's an extraordinary realm. The extraordinary is extraordinary. We just having an extra look at the ordinary, like, to see how extraordinary it really is, like, that it's in the Bible, like, Moses is going for a walk. Moses wasn't some highly fucking learned man, he was just a a Jewish dude up on the hill, like minding his sheep or whatever. Like he's walking along and he saw this burning bush. This bush was on flame, and he heard his voice speaking out, and he knew it was the voice of God. And it was, what did he say? Moses, take off your shoes, for the ground on where thou standst is holy ground. Yeah. So Moses knew what he meant. He took off his shoes, but he didn't mean that the ground around the bush was holy. The earth is holy, like.
The earth is holy,
yeah.
Wow.
The earth is holy. The ground on where thou standst is holy ground. Yeah. Everywhere we walk is holy. Yeah. Everywhere is paradise. Everywhere is the other world. It's just when we can take those veils of perception, when they fall away from us, like we can perceive that. Yeah. Every bush is a burning bush. Yeah. It's not a fire. It's a bush inflamed with its spiritual dimensions. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? That aura, the halo, like. Very good. We all have halos, like.
Yeah.
We're all angels, we're all gods, you know?
Yeah.
You know? So that's what poetry continually seeks to tell us, like. That's what religion, that's what all spiritualities continually seek to tell us, I feel, you know? Yeah. You know? The ground on where we stand is holy ground.
So Paddy, if I can just pick you up on that particular, on a particular point that strikes me really as you're speaking. And some of our American friends, to be fair, might need a bit of an explanation around this, because I'm going to use the term druid.
Yeah.
Which is an ancient Irish religion. I presume you can enlighten me in a second, okay?
Yeah.
So you spoke, and we mentioned it over coffee earlier before we sat to talk, that you have at least an interest in the druid or the druidic traditions, or you are indeed a druid or modern day druid. And at the same time then you're using examples like the burning bush, which is taken directly from the Bible, a very religious, Catholic, I suppose, example. So how do you melt the two of those together? How do you actually reconcile those two, you know, and in your own personal experience?
Yeah. For me, there's never been much reconciliation needed, like. They're all stories. We think of the Bible as Catholic, it's not really as the mythic history of the Jewish people.
Okay. In
the same way as Laura Gall and Aaron is the mythic history of the Irish people, like, you know. Okay. It's a series of stories which quite likely have some currency in history, really, like, but are actually we're in the realm of mythos as opposed to mutos, the ancient term or the ancient understanding of mutos as opposed to logos.
Can you explain those terms?
Yeah, so mutos or mythos is the mythical mind or the mythical dimension of the world, and logos is, I suppose, the logical dimension of the world. So people who are, say, familiar with Christianity Christ is St. John in John's Gospel is probably the first person to call Christ. He was the Logos. In the beginning was the Word is made flesh. So he was the Logos, the living Word.
Okay.
Christ is the living Word.
Yep.
Poetry, in the beginning was the Word, you know. Okay. The Word was sung into being, like, you know. So Christ is the living Word that's continually expressed throughout creation, like, Okay. In mystical Christianity, you have the Creator God, you have the Holy Spirit, and you have the Christos. So that's the Holy Trinity. Uncreated, you have God, which is uncreated, like, from which all things are born and to which all things return. You have the Holy Spirit, which is the movement or the desire of that body of consciousness to experience itself, that original desire, that inflaming of the heart to know and to experience itself, like. So the Holy Spirit brings creation into being, which is Christ. So creation, in mystical Christianity, all of creation is Christ. Christ is creation, like. So when we speak of, when they really speak of the body of Christ, Corpus Christi, this is all of creation. All creation is sacred and is an expression of the divine will of God, like.
Okay.
Do you know? It's probably quite similar. It's very similar, really, to say Taoism. You have the Tao.
Yeah. In Buddhism, then,
And Buddhism, it's all the same, really. Like, you have Taoism, you have the Tai Chi. And then you have yin and yang. So Tao is God, Tai Chi is the movement, the desire, which is the Holy Spirit, and then yin and yang. They just differentiate, because Christ in mystical Christianity, Christ is neither male or female. He's an embodiment of the divine and the feminine aspects of creation, like, Now, I'm aware that's coming from a patriarchal framework as well, like, you know. So in the Tao, they call it yin and yang, and so 1 give birth to 2, give birth to 4, give birth to 10,000. Like from yin and yang comes the 10,000 things. Like
Okay.
So how did we get here? Sorry.
Sorry.
How did we get here?
Yeah. I'm just wondering about.
Yeah.
I mean that's a lovely encapsulation of let's say.
Oh, so we're mutas and logos, like yeah.
And then connecting that to let's say the druid tradition, which I mean is pagan, really. I suppose more interested in the land, and the connection. I suppose. Educate me here again.
Yeah.
But the connection to the land ultimately, So. Yeah. It seems like two traditions in a way. No, I feel you're going to connect it through the expression of Christ and religion and all things spiritual in an expression of nature, which is what the Druids were interested in. Or am I wrong?
Well, the Druids and Druidism as Christian and Catholicism, they're very loaded words now. Do you know what I mean? Like, we really don't have any idea how people believe. 3, 4, 5,000 years ago, we really don't. We have a few snippets, like, and we kind of have a tendency to project our own things back in there. But there is also educated approaches to it as well, I feel. Sure. You know what I mean? Like, but that does require deep scholarship, and there is also inspirational sources like this. The Druids of the Ages, the spirits of the Ages. Again, they're not far away. Like, they're present with us. Like, you know what I mean? And we can have direct revelation. Mm-hmm. So Druidry, unlike Christianity, missing Christianity different. Like, Druidry is a path of direct revelation. So you spend time with. You seek the divine through nature, through practice, through worship, through poetry, especially in Ireland. It was a huge spiritual practice, like, it was like a huge spiritual practice, like, Okay. To write was to receive, like, it was inspiration, like, in spirito, breathe in spirit, like, you breathe it in, you breathe it out. It comes on the in breath and you speak it on the out breath, like, it's mantic, it was a mantic practice, it was magical, like. Poets were magicians, like, the term poet now is someone who writes, but Phila is a title, like, and
it's the Irish for poet, right?
Irish for poet, like, Phila, like, so how to reconcile Christianity and Druidry? They're all stories. The story of Moses.
Full story. It comes
it's
back
a story.
to the full circle, rather.
It's a story, and there are myths, the archetype myths that come up, and they're just expressed in different ways in different cultures, but they're often the same stories, like, Early Irish Christianity was really emerging of pre-Christian beliefs, traditions and religions with a new story that arrived in the shore, We're the only country in Western Europe, actually probably in Europe, that wasn't Christianized by the sword. We weren't conquered really by an invading army, like.
It was here already.
No, we took Christianity on of our own accord, like. We were hungry for it, like. It's a bit of it. They're often trying to figure out why was that, like, Now there's a few different factors. It's probably too complex to get here, like, but there's a few different factors, and cultures are often in need of change, like, and there's an impetus for cultures to change, But I think a huge part of it was like, it brought the book learning, and it brought all these stories. Like, Irish people are just a nation of storytellers. Like, we just love stories, We do. And we particularly love a wonder tale, like a tale with magic in it, like. Where some lad or someone just does amazing stuff, or they're walking down the roadway and they end up in this magical world and have these amazing adventures, and then they come back and the mother's going like, "Don't do something, will you?" Do you know what I mean? We love that kind of a story, So I feel when the Bible came, like, it brought all these new stories from far distant kingdoms, like stories of Egypt, the pharaohs, Moses, all these prophets, angels, kings and queens of the ages, like, Salome, John the Baptist, Moses, Pharaoh, all these wonderful stories, and we just went, we'll have a bit of that, like,
I know.
We'll have a bit of that, like. Well, no, here's another thing that I find as well, like, we're not just a nation, we're a nation of storytellers, like, So now, if you look at the story of Christ, like the gospel, like, and that's a wonder tale. Do you know what I mean? He was a mortal dude, like. We had loads of gods and goddesses, Cuchulainn and Lugh and all them, they did magic and stuff, but they were all gods, like. But then you had this Yeshua ben Joseph from Israel, like, whatever, like, he was a mortal dude, like, and he was like, he was one of us. He could do this, like, and that's a proper wonder tale, like, but also, I feel, if you look at the Bible, and there's 4 books in the Bible, like, and they're short. There's not a lot. They're very short. It's the same. The Bible is that thick. The New Testament, and it's the same story told 4 times. As far as I can see, all Jesus does really in that book is walk around with a bunch of lads and women, town to town, hanging out with his friends, telling stories and healing people. Like, do you know?
That's basically it.
Yeah. So he wasn't just a a wonderful story. He was a wonderful storyteller, like.
And we're not being irreverent when
No,
you
we're not
say
being
that.
irreverent, like.
You know, that's
You know, he was a wonderful storyteller, like. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And how can we not love him? He was a bard.
A bard is another Irish word.
You know what I mean? Like his mother might have been from Israel, but his father was definitely Irish. He had to be, no?
But if listening to you, what struck me there was, you know, is it possible that, like, say, the Irish, for example, you know, we love stories. We're a nation of storytellers, to be fair.
Yeah.
We're not shy when it comes to saying a few words in general.
Yeah.
Is it because your wonder stories in particular are an expression of what's possible? You know? And I mean, like, so a lot of people would gravitate to a story because they can possibly see themselves as the main character and what may be possible for them to achieve in their life, you know, and that they can resonate with that, and it inspires hope and motivation and all of that. You know, would that be fair to say?
That definitely, like, and there's also another dimension as well. I feel like stories, particularly there in the Irish tradition and any of those oral culture traditions, were ceremonial. So a story really, when it's told, it evokes, it actually releases dopamine in the brain, the shape of the story, and it brings you into a trance. So it's actually a way of journeying, like. So a story is a portal or a doorway into the other world. So when you were telling a story, when we're in the throes of a good story being told, you can journey into other kingdoms, like, and you can walk around in these kind of mythic and archetypical dimensions, not just of the world but of yourself.
Yeah.
And you're actually touching parts of yourself that don't usually get touched in your day-to-day existence. You get a sense of your own depth, your own magnificence, and your own divinity, like, you know.
Yeah.
You know, you get to walk with gods, you get to walk with angels, you get to all this stuff. Do you know what I mean? And I feel that's a huge part of it, like, you know. So stories are that's why we love stories. That's why we need stories. Yeah. That's why we need stories.
We need them.
We need stories. Yeah. And stories are living things. Like, they're living energies. They're beings. Like I have friends of mine. Some of my best friends are stories. Like, I've known them for 20, 30, 40 years. Like, you know.
Yeah.
I spent more time with them than I spent with some of my close friends.
And they've taken on a personality of sorts.
No, they haven't taken on a personality at all. No, they were around before I was ever born. Like, they're actually, because they're deep in the collective consciousness. Like, they're deep. They're energies. They're basically gods.
Okay.
Yeah, they're basically gods. They're how stories are the vehicles, are the chariots through which the gods and the ancient goddesses ride through our lives, through our minds and our hearts and our thoughts and our days. Yeah. They are these ancient powers, and that's how they come up from the deep and they ride. Yeah. I'll tell you a good story, actually.
Go on. I've been waiting.
Yeah, this Bran MacFebble, right, lived up the north of Ireland one time. Yeah, way back now. Like, he's Febble, actually, the River Foyle that flows into Derry Bay comes from Febble. Like, and Bran is Raven. Like,
right.
So he was a young man, and I suppose even now in rural Ireland, a lot of time there's not a whole lot to do, you know. So you live your day. End of the week, you walk down to the crossroads, you hang around with your mates, and you kind of sit there, kind of waiting for something to happen, and maybe someday something might happen. It very rarely does. Do you know what I mean? Like, but it's the hope. You live in the hope, like, you know. And one day, Bran went, you know what? There's not enough. I'm out of here. So he built himself a boat, and he set off sail into the Western Ocean. He's only young, 22, right? Set off sail into the Western Ocean, and he sailed out until he was out beyond land, until there was nothing left but the two rims of the world. Those beautiful blue circles merged together in a perfect circle of blue. And as he was out there, he was gone so far there was no birds anymore, just water, just wind, just waves, and just sun. And as he was out there going, Jesus, maybe you're going a bit too far, but I may keep going now anyway, you know. So anyway, as he was out there, he heard this kind of thundering, this sound coming, and it got louder. And he looked out to the west, and the sun was setting, and out of the sun came riding this shimmer of gold, silver, and it came thundering towards him, thundering, and he saw that actually it was a golden chariot being pulled by 16 white horses, their white manes blowing in the wind, and in the chariot stood this tall, beautiful man with golden hair and all multicoloured cloaks. And the sun was glinting off his hair and his eyes, and it was like a marvel coming towards him, a marvel. And he was going, geez, I better get out of the way, this lad's not going to stop, do you know what I mean? He's got a bit of steam up. So when he pulled in a bit, like, and your man kept coming, the man must have spotted him. And he started, whoa! He pulled in the horses anyway, and skidded to a halt right in front of me, you know? And he looked down at him from his big, glorious chariot and said, good morrow, fellow traveller. what brings you to these parts? And Bran looks up and goes, how's it going? And the big man says, what's your name? My name is Bran. I came from Ireland. I'm sailing into the Western world in search of adventure. And the man said, I'm Manaman MacLear, known to us as the Lord of the Sea, Lord of the Ocean. I'm Manaman MacLear. But pray tell me, fellow traveller, what are you doing out here in the middle of this flowering plain on a little boat? Are you mad or what? And Bran goes, what do you mean, a flowering plain like? He says, it's a flowering plain like. And Bran goes, but to me, this is an ocean, lapping waves, and I'm on a small boat in the middle of nowhere like. And Manaman goes like, no way. And Bran's, yeah, no way. Yeah, says Bran. He puts down his hand. He picks up a fish out of the water. He goes, here you go. And Manaman took the fish in his hand, dripping wet. He said, wow, that's amazing. That beats all. Never seen it before in all my living days. He says, do you know what? Manaman put down his hand. And he picked up a flower, a beautiful prairie flower. And he handed it to Bran. And Bran took the flower in his hand. He said, wow, that's amazing, that beats all. Never seen that before in all my living days. Isn't that amazing? He says, no, isn't that amazing? I see you now. And Bran said, hail and farewell, old friend. Thank you for the flower. And Manaman said, hail and farewell, fellow friend. Thank you for the fish. And the boat sailed on and rowed on, bringing with them their gifts of the other world, as each of them had perceived it.
Wow.
You know?
That's fantastic.
That's fantastic. That's what stories are.
Yeah.
Ways of perceiving the world.
But that even gets me thinking about how I perceive things, you know,
Yeah.
and interpretation and other people's view on the world and their paradigm.
Yeah.
You know, that's
Yeah.
amazing. Thanks for that.
So what was the real gift he was given?
The gift of sight, the gift of alternate view.
The gift of perception. Yeah.
Perception,
Yeah,
yeah.
being able to see from another person's perspective, like, yeah.
And that's a brilliant example of how you can learn from a story, Paddy.
Exactly, like, yeah. That's what stories are for. These stories have come down to us for thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of years. You know? When the first people came to this island 10,000 years ago, they came on little small boats, log very small rudimentary boats, like.
Yeah.
They brought with them seeds and some animals. But that wasn't the most precious cargo.
Yeah.
They brought with them their stories that had come to them for the great continental plains, from the time of the woolly mammoths, from the time of the giant tigers, the hyenas that roamed these plains.
Yeah.
Thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, they brought their stories with them.
Yeah.
And when they came to a new land, they looked around them and they shaped their own stories to fit their environment, like.
Amazing.
And that's what we do. So stories are living things that come to us in the mind of God. They come to us from the heart of the earth. And they were here before we ever came. They'll be here long after we're gone. And they shape the world. The stories that come to us shapes the world we know.
Yeah.
And we also shape the stories to fit the world as well, you know. It's shape-shifting all the time, like. And stories can go dormant for a long time. They can go dormant for hundreds, even thousands of years. But when the time arises for those stories, when the need for those stories arise again, they will come back up into the consciousness through the inspiration of a poet or a musician or a storyteller. It will present itself anew because it has a way of being or a way of seeing the world that is needed right now. That's what they do. There's like Fintan MacBocra. Few people in Ireland know Fintan MacBocra. We all know Culcullen, Fionn McCool and all them lads. Yeah. Well, there's an ancient, more wise hero, really. He was the first man to come to this land. Fintan MacBocra. He came with Caesar on one of the first voyages.
Okay.
And he was here before the flood. He survived the flood.
Yeah.
And he brought with him all the wisdom of the old world, from Atlantis, Lemuria, all the old stories, the old songs, the old airs, the old prayers. He had all the wisdom of the ancient days. His name means Finn Tuan MacBocra, Fionn Tuan. So Fionn means bright or illumination.
Okay.
In Proto-Celtic, in ancient Indo-European actually, it comes from Vindos. It means illumination. in cognitive perceptual terms to be enlightened, like, yeah,
Sure.
to have bright knowledge, like, yeah.
Excellent.
And so it was, if you look back through Irish history, a lot of the poets are called Finnis, Finnecus. It was actually a title given to poets when they reached a certain level of poetic illumination. Like, the most recent example I like actually is if you know Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
At the beginning of first book of Lord of the Rings, Gandalf dies, and I think at the end of the second or third he comes back. He dies as Gandalf the Grey. He comes back as Gandalf the White.
Yeah.
Finned Gandalf, because he died and being reborn as a higher level himself.
Yes.
Like, yeah. So Finn and Tuin, Sfinton, Finn Tuin. Finn Tuin is an ancient Indo-European word. There's a group of languages that stretch from Sanskrit in India to Connemara. Indo-European, like, yeah. They're the same language group, like, yeah. So Tuin means silent or mute. So it speaks of knowledge that cannot be spoken of.
Okay.
There is no words for it, or it's so old we do not have the words for it anymore, but it's definitely the same. So that's Tuin in Ireland. In Sanskrit it's come down as Swami. Do you know Swami?
I've heard that word.
So Swami is the Sanskrit name for sage.
Okay. Yeah.
Again, they have wisdom beyond words, like, yeah. So it's that old, that I understand. So Finn Tuin, the illuminated one who carries with him knowledge that cannot be spoken of.
Wow. Because
he brought with him all the wisdom of the old world, and he survived. And when this land got flooded by the great floods, the biblical floods, the traditional floods that are recorded in all cultures, but also from when after the ice age, at the last ice age, with the melting of the ice caps and all that, and a lot of stuff was flooded, lots of kindling sank. He survived those floods in the midst by first transmigrating into the form of a salmon. He lived for many hundreds of years as a salmon, and then he migrated into I think a stag, and then he lived on Achill as a hawk for a couple of hundred years. Like,
wow.
Yeah, and he's the one that wants to come back in now. Yeah. It's time for Fintan MacWalker to take up his true place as the centre piece of our culture.
That's beautiful.
Because he brings the old stories.
Yeah.
Cuchulainn and all them, Finn McCool, they were great. They were coming in around the time of 1916 with the Celtic Renaissance and all that. Yes, and all them, at a time when we needed defenders, warriors, like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But a lot of those, Cuchulainn and Finn McCool, both of them, and a lot of the male warriors, archetypal, they were flawed warriors, really. They were written into the culture as being flawed, like, because they weren't able to actually integrate the feminine aspects of their personalities, like of their psyches. Fionn McCool couldn't hold a woman. Do you know what I mean? There was just it was written into the midst that these warriors have a particular energy, but they're flawed. They're not fully integrated, like.
Sure.
But they came back in at a time when we needed warriors, really, like, you weren't afraid to cut throats and do that. You know what I mean, like, you know. But now that time has passed, and we need older, deeper, more abiding wisdom of integration of masculine and feminine principles to come in. And Fintan MacWalker is the one that wants to come back in now.
Fantastic.
Yeah, because he's
that's interesting.
It's interesting, like, yeah. He's the sage. It's time for the time of the warriors past. It's time,
because a lot of us would think that, you know, tradition and stories are fixed.
No.
You know, and that, you know, you pay reverence to them by just studying them as they are, and that's it. But they're not dynamic. So this notion of a dynamic character, when you need that wisdom, you know, to come back, is fascinating.
Yeah. You know, that's definitely. It's time. The time of the warriors past. The time of the sages come. I think, you know. Speaking
of sage and sages, I'm just wondering, I'm going to stop the camera and I'm going to come back to you, and I would really be honoured if you could maybe recite a poem.
Yeah, no problem. Like,
if you could tell another story or whatever, and we can just showcase the brilliance of you.
Yeah.
And I'm going to give you some time to think about it.
I don't need time to think.
All right, sure, we'll go straight away. So do you have something in your mind that you'd like to recite?
Do some. I can do you. Do you know what? I'll do a few different pieces. Like,
Very good. Okay.
First one I want to do the one that comes is from my grandmother. I want to speak of my grandmother, speak of the great mother.
Okay.
Yeah, it took me a long time to realise that the triple goddess that's in our culture and in many cultures, like, there's many different understandings of it, there's many different layers and dimensions of it. But there's one that took me a long time to realise. I probably knew it intellectually, but for it to go click and to align in my body is that, like, and I think it's one that men probably need to maybe come home to as well, you know, is that the great goddess, the cosmic goddess, and the earth goddess The earth goddess, the earth is an emanation of the cosmic goddess, the principle, yeah? And then human beings are an emanation of the earth, like an expression of the earth, yeah?
Yeah.
It took me a long time to realise that women and the earth and God, or the goddess, are one. You cannot separate them, like, yeah, as you cannot separate men and the earth and God, like. So we need to have, you know what I mean? We can't differentiate how we treat the earth, how we treat women, or how we treat the earth and how we treat people, and how we treat our relationship to the divine. You can't. There's no room for discretion there, I feel. It has to be, you know. But then, this is one of my grandmother. Your love was as natural as the hawthorn that blessed us with blossom year after year, as faithful as the blue tits who returned each spring to build a nest in Newlands Pier. On winter nights when the adults would go out, your stories opened doors to hidden worlds. Our minds were like swallows flying south along the ancient songline of your words. With you, we could always be children, creeping through hedges into fields full of rhyme. We were safe there with your gentle wisdom as you wandered the old folkways of your mind, where your memory and our fantasy merged on the same magical frequency. You knew why flash lamps failed in fairy rings, and once you brought a calf back from the dead. When you spoke to the world behind all things, they seemed to answer every prayer you said. From signs left behind by things unseen, you deciphered all we needed to know. The Clemente dogs are barking, Paddy, meant an east wind was bringing frost or snow. Running barefoot through the dew-wet grass, we picked mushrooms in the cobweb dawn. On the Easter Sunday morning after early mass, we blessed the crops as Christ was being reborn. And as we drank 3 sups of holy water apiece, we saw the sun dance 3 times in the east. That's from my grandmother.
That's beautiful.
This one's for the great mother. I'm going to take a sup of water there now.
Do. That's fantastic.
So, great mother, open our hearts and let us know again. And you asked me earlier on about the poetry and prayer. For me, poetry is prayer. Prayer is poetry, like this. You know, there's a prayer dimension. Invocations, really, like, you know. Great mother, open our hearts and let us know again the goodness of the world. Help us shed these lizard skins and prize the rusted armour from our eyes. Too long we have clung to the false creed of barbed wire and fences, laying on stone floors and cowered in the darkness of cellars. Our cupboards are bare, our gourds are empty. Great Mother, unfurl our senses and let our bodies know the warm kiss of the sun. Let our ears buzz with news of the creature kingdom, our eyes go drunk on the green wine of rain. Lower the drawbridge, break open the dungeons, call your servants from the kitchens and crown them as queens and kings. Great Mother, grant us your blessing to rewild this world with your longing. Steer our hearts so thy will be done. Let the sacred hoop be mended. Let wolf music ring from the forest and wildcats straddle the mountains. Let the mighty bear clans march from the north, bringing music and medicine much older than ours, and magic to break our enchantment. Great Mother, we are your children. Teach us how to love.
Fantastic.
Very good.
Paddy,
Yeah.
I think we'll call time.
Yeah.
Alright, it's been an absolute pleasure to meet a poet, a storyteller in Irish, a Shanachie, a druid. There's almost so much scope. We could be here for a week.
We could go
talking.
on, like, yeah.
We could be here for a week. But I just want to say thanks a million because it's been completely enlightening for me, and I know that it's going to be a revelation for everybody who's been watching on this episode of Healers. And I just want to say thank you so much.
No problem. My pleasure.
Fantastic.
Very good. Good job, man.
Thanks, Paddy.
Cheers. Sound.